Hello and welcome to today's LEF webinar, BRM versus DBL, 2 taxonomies and 1 digital IQ. I'm talking to you today on what is a heat wave here in the UK, and it's quite ironic that in the calendar for this session we said we'd have a fireside chat, and I think we probably need more of a poolside chat for today for the folks that are here in the UK. For those that don't know me, I'm Pip. I'm a client manager here at the LEF, and I'm your host today for the session. I'm here with my colleague, Lasher. He's our LEF research advisor here. Some of you may already have met Lem or come across Lem with the extensive work that he's done in the BRM DBL field. He has recently written us a commentary called Technology's Role in a Constantly Evolving Enterprise. We're going to spend today's session answering some of the common questions that we find our clients are asking in this space. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature in this Zoom. I'm going to kick us off with a couple to start with, and then I encourage you guys to pop your questions in, and we'll take it from there. So Lem, historically, IT has often been a bit of an afterthought, a bit harsh, but true. And what we've seen over recent months is IT really step up to its role and really transform the enterprise. And if I think of a bit of a micro level, I live just round the corner from a nice row of independent small bars and restaurants, and they've actually had to use IT to effectively survive over recent months. They've not been able to have, people in their restaurants and bars. So they've looked to the likes of Uber Eats and Deliveroo to kind of still deliver that level of service that they want to in order to stay in business and survive. And I guess in a corporate world, IT communities have had to step up and enable thousands of people to remote work overnight. So I guess my first question, Lem, is now IT's got that spotlight that it's always wanted. How do we ensure we keep it?
Right. Well, thanks a lot, Pip. So I think what's different about today than in the past is that in the past, we viewed disruption from technology as being a factor in changing business models. But right now with the coronavirus, what we see is that it's the external environment that is disrupting, and technology is actually enabling businesses to survive and to transform themselves. So it's a big difference in the overall environment. And in terms of how IT can respond to it, I'd like to focus first of all on the role of the DBL or the BRM, the digital business leader or the business relationship manager, depending on the taxonomy you prefer, because that role is really critical in enabling the IT organization to respond to this new opportunity. And the way I would describe it is that the BRM or the DBL really brings 2 things to the table. One, they bring focus. They bring an attention to a specific issue that the business faces. And secondly, they provide orchestration. So the ability to focus on a particular issue and orchestrate the IT's organization's capability to respond to that is really the critical aspect of that role. And it's a very difficult role. It's a very challenging role. And I would argue from a management point of view, that role is the most sophisticated role in the IT organization because it bridges 2 worlds. It bridges the world of business and with the world of technology. They need to be bilingual, bicultural in terms of how they operate. And this issue of focus, the way I would describe it is the metaphor that I like to use is that of a doctor. That a doctor gets together with a patient, the patient has some unease or some issue, maybe it's just a normal checkup, but the doctor's job is to identify and to diagnose what is the challenge, what is the problem that's there. And the skill sets that are required for the doctor to be effective are the same skill sets that the DBL and the BRM need to have in being effective in their role as it relates to focus, which is they need to be very good at listening. They need to be able to understand what the patient is saying and be able to listen and with a great deal of empathy to what the patient is experiencing. They need to bring their analytical skills and knowledge of medicine to bear to apply to what they're hearing and what they're understanding. And they need to be proactive. They need to advance solutions and remedies to the particular situation rather than waiting for the situation to deteriorate further. And so that metaphor of the doctor is the one we use frequently in our training programs in terms of helping BRMs and DBLs understand their posture, which is to bring that focus in the same way that a doctor would, and then orchestrate the IT organization to address that in the same way the doctor would rely on all the technologies that are available, all the medicines that are available, all the techniques that they've learned through their training and education. I think that's a useful metaphor for them to understand. So what is it that the BRM and the DBL need to focus on in this environment of coronavirus and the crisis that's there? Well, there's three different dimensions to it. One is they need to be looking for real business model disruption. They need to look and see whether or not the actual ability of the organization to monetize their value proposition in this new environment is still viable. And in some cases, it's not. In some cases, we've seen organizations' revenue drop to zero overnight. And so there's a huge challenge for the business model that isn't just a matter of an environmental issue, it's an existential crisis for them. And the way that the IT organization responds to that is going to be very different to the organization whose business model remains viable, but they need to change the way they deliver what they're doing. They need to look at different structures and different processes in order to deliver the proposition, but their business model really isn't at risk. So for example, a restaurant business model remains essentially the same in this environment. They will provide food and they will charge people that food and people will pay for that food on an individual basis. But the entire way they deliver that and the environment in terms of the changes in processes, the changes in structure and how they organize, whether they're doing takeout, whether they're allowing people to come in the restaurant, sitting spacing apart and so on and so forth. There's a lot of transformational activity in the way that the restaurant delivers it, but their business model remains in place. And then finally, in some cases, there's no business model disruption. There's no real need to transform the organization. What they need to do is to apply a technology aggressively to maintain their ability to deliver the services that they're delivering to their customers. So their agenda is really about assuring that the technology is resilient, that it's stable, that it's economically viable, and to provide that. And there are a number of companies, particularly in the tech space, who are in that model where their business is actually thriving in the coronavirus crisis that we have, but they need to be better at what they're doing. Their networks need to be much more resilient. They need to be more adaptable and more flexible in what they do. So that's really the job of the BRM or the DBL, is to get the right diagnosis as to what the impact of this is. And that's no different from pre-coronavirus. It's just coronavirus has changed the landscape in a very fundamental way so that now IT is seen as an enabler to mitigate disruption rather than an agent to produce and precipitate disruption in the overall business. So in order for them to orchestrate that, we've developed a framework, which you've put up there, called the 4P model, which looks at how the organization and the IT organization is positioned and how it delivers value. And on the vertical axis, we have the mission or the specific objectives that the organization has or the roles have. We look at the style of collaboration, and by mapping the two, we get a pretty good sense of the total scope of an IT organization that the BRM needs to orchestrate. In some cases, it's just basically provider activity or managing supply and delivering on the contractual obligations as normally reflected in SLAs to the business. So that role is more one of stability, but the BRM needs to be very capable and very conversant in what provider role is. There's also, the role of the promoter, which is to stimulate demand, to advocate technology, to bring technology to bear in this environment. And so if we have a situation where there's a disruption going on in the operating model and not the business model, the BRM should be looking for technologies that can be promoted in the business to help the business sustain itself during that period. Or maybe we're talking about the partner role, which is basically enabling change, dealing with structure and process that's technology agnostic, but enabled by technology going forward. And they need to be sensitive to that to see whether or not they need to help with process change or structural change in order for them to deliver their value proposition. And then finally, where you really have serious disruption going on in the business model, the peer role, which is leading the business, not just participating in it, and driving strategies that enable the business to adopt and change, in light of the threat that's taken place, in the business model itself. So that's kind of the role of the BRM, is to understand what that change means to the business, and then to understand the necessary techniques to identify what that challenge is, and then to be able to effectively orchestrate the organization. We found that the 4P model is a great way of looking at the IT organization to identify what resources or what capabilities need to be brought to bear. So I hope that kind of answers your question of what you were looking for.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And but what it does sort of make me question is, they're easy to get confused, the two programs, BRM and DBL, because they're so similar. What are the subtle differences of each one?
Okay, that's a great question. So first of all, the BRM is a much more mature taxonomy that's been used in the business for quite some time. And it came really out of the IT organization's need or desire to add more value to the business. And generally, the clients that we work with who are more focused on BRM than DBL, it's because they want to mature the organization, they want to advance it, they want to reposition it. And one of the common quotes we hear from them is, "We just can't get no respect." That we're brought to the table after the business decisions have been made, and we're being asked to respond to business requirements, but we're not able to participate in them in some way. So generally, the BRM culture was developed to respond to a perceived need that the IT organization had, of being kind of blocked in this provider mode and not able to participate in the full value propositions that IT can bring to the business. So one is an element of timing. And with the ubiquity of technology, and with the advance of social media and the use of all of the technologies that are now out there, the DBL term emerged because it was clear that just the traditional inside out, or from the IT organization to the business, did not adequately reflect the full dimensions of what that role should be. So there was a timing issue associated with that. The second aspect of it is that frequently it comes down to what is the existing relationship that the IT organization has with the business. And frequently, where we've seen more mature organizations, more advanced IT organizations, where the business recognizes that value and is simply asking for more participation at the peer level, the partner level, and the promoter level, that's where we start to see the language of digital business leadership coming in, because it's not so much about, improving the role of IT in the organization and getting more respect. It's about the business wanting to engage with the IT organization in a much more mature conversation as a peer. And matter of fact, one of our customers has engaged us to work with a number of their, over 100 of their top executives, to help them operate as a peer. That's their focus, and they're getting the direction directly from the CEO, who wants the organization to step up and be at the top table and being engaged in those full conversations. So one is an issue of timing, and BRM has been around much longer than digital business leadership. And the other is the structural relationship between the IT organization and the business, and the personal relationships that they have on that basis. But the agenda is the same. The agenda is the same. It's being able to engage in a much more proactive, value-added role that IT could provide to the business, rather than just responding to business requirements in the traditional role.
Great. And Lem, and it's really important to note that nobody has the answers for this. This is all kind of, we figure this out through experiments, and I'd love to kind of take you through a couple of roles really here. There's different people as an audience on this call, and if I was a BRM Senior, what advice would you give me to help bring tech forwards into the business?
Okay, great question. So the first thing I would do is don't try to bring tech forward. don't have a technology-centric view on what you're trying to do. And if we go back to why the IT organizations are in the position they're in, which is the preponderance of them are in provider mode, struggling to operate as peers and struggling to operate as partners. It's because they've had a technology-centric view of what they're trying to do. Their view is, how can we make technology more relevant? And the question should really be, what are the challenges that the business has that we can bring value to by applying technology. Because technology adds no value to the business in and of itself. The value comes when change is introduced and technology is enabling that change to take place. So the question should be, how can I better understand what it is the business is looking for? How can I better understand what their challenges are? And then how can I deploy and orchestrate, if you will, the IT organization to bring that value to the overall business? That's the first thing. And if we look at the cause of that, why is that? Why is it the IT organization so often looks at technology? It's because that's the way most people were educated. That's the way most people that were brought up. The people that are active in IT are people that have, high levels of intellectual capability, that what I would call are left brain activities. They're very rational, they're very logical. They look at things in a way that is very incremental in nature, it's very process centric in nature. And so they're used to seeing the world in that particular way. And one of the things that we strongly encourage the people that participate in our programs is to become more aware of the right brain side of the equation, to be more aware of the right hemisphere of the brain, which is that which does, the synthesis, that does that works on narratives, that works on myths, that works in metaphors, that works in unstructured problems, that works in ambiguity rather than always trying to get clarity. And so the key is to develop some of those skill sets and develop more awareness of those tools and that language and that mentality and that notion that the business looks at it. Because IT is very comfortable solving problems. That's not the problem. IT, if they have a problem put on their desk, they're pretty good at solving them. What they're not able to do is identify what the problem is. So it's problem diagnosis. And left brain, left hemisphere centric, rational, logical thinking doesn't always help in understanding the problem, because the problem is often multi-domain. And so you need that ability to synthesize, to cross boundaries, to look at things in a much more holistic way that enables you to do a better diagnosis. Again, the role of the BRM is focus and orchestration. And that focus, and a very strong element of that focus, is the ability to properly diagnose what the challenges are.
Great. And we've had a great question come in as you've been answering that one. Len, do you see DBL sitting in the business area instead of IT then?
Well, DBL is a role. It is not a position. That's what's important to understand. And the distinction between IT and the business is something that we would hope goes away. In the same way we look at marketing, or the same way we look at finance, they are the business. And to ask the question, should the DBL be in IT or be in the business, assumes that they're different. IT is the business. And that's one of the changes in mentality we want to bring apart. Now, it's very useful to have the digital business leader in IT because of the orchestration factor. But it's also very useful to have the DBL in the business because of the focus factor. And so it will vary depending on the context. It will depend on the organization. It will depend to a great extent on the leadership of the organizations. And one of the things that is really critical is the relationship that the digital business leader has with the CEO, with the top table. And one of the things that we found to be rather curious is that given the length of time the technology has been pervasive in the organization, that many IT organizations still report to the CFO. And we think that's an indication of the level of maturity and the level of perception that the IT organization has from the business. So whether the DBL sits in the business or whether the DBL sits in the IT will vary company by company, culture by culture, situation by situation. But what's key is that the role is performed, which is you have to have someone in the business owning the digital agenda for the business, providing that focus to the business on where they need to pay attention to so that the IT organization can be orchestrated. There are many people that are prognosticating that the IT organization will go away. I personally don't believe that. I believe that the IT organization will continue to be around for a very long period of time. However, it will be functioning very differently than the way it does today. And we've done a lot of research, and a lot of the work we do in BRM and DBL is to show BRMs and IT organizations what that organization is going to look like in the future. And it will not be the way it is operating for most companies today. That's why they're blocked in the provider mode, is because they're still functioning in that way.
Thanks, Len. We've had a couple more great questions come in. somebody has said, love this 4P model on the screen right now. How to think about it in comparison or in contrast to how an organization may use a maturity model, like with the business relationship maturity model from BRM Institute?
Well, this is a maturity model. This does tell you a certain amount of maturity, but we found this model to be very useful in a number of different ways. So one way is to help the organization assess how they're positioned vis-a-vis the business. And one of the exercises we go through is we work in the workshop, we talk to the team, and we get a sense of where they think the organization is and where they think they are individually. Because what's important to remember is that everything doesn't need to go to peer. The IT organization, a healthy IT organization, has all four of those elements that are robustly reflected. And so you can, in one sense, you can say the peer is more mature than the partner, or the partner is more mature than the promoter, or the promoter is more mature than the provider. I don't think that logic applies. I think what we need to recognize is that they each have their own value proposition that they're bringing to the business. And the maturity matrix should reflect how mature the organization is and their ability to orchestrate against all four domains. And so if you take a look at the kind of principal value propositions that IT can bring to the business, I kind of look at it in five different ways. So one is that IT, and this is the one that's most commonly viewed and understood by both IT and the business, which is IT is there to reduce IT cost. And that's a very, very uncomfortable position for IT to be in. They're given a budget, they've got to reduce their cost, either reduce their cost against benchmarks that have been done externally, or reduce it against last year's spend, or whatever metrics they use. But it's all about IT cost reduction. And IT organizations overall have been pretty effective at doing that. And the business is very comfortable asking IT to not spend much money. So it's a very unhealthy relationship in that respect, because actually the business, in my view, should be spending more money on technology, not less money. And by constantly reducing the amount of money that they're investing in technology, they actually reduce the strategic positioning of the overall organization. Nevertheless, as far as the business is concerned, the reduction of IT cost is an important value proposition. And unfortunately, IT organizations tend to focus on that and tend to think that anytime they're reducing IT cost, they're adding value to the business, and they are. But the amount of value that you can add by reducing your IT cost is minimal compared to the value you can add by reducing business costs. And this is where big numbers can start to take place. By transformational activities and structure and processes, IT can provide tremendous amount of value. It's more difficult to do. It requires more mature skill sets like partner and peer skill sets to be able to assess what changes are appropriate. And then you've got transformational agenda issues and culture and change management. All this stuff is very difficult and very messy and very uncomfortable for the IT organization to participate in. But that's where they can add real value on it. Another area where the IT organization can add a lot of value is in security. And particularly with this cyber attacks and activity that's going on there, having a very robust security strategy for the business is really critical, and that's something that they continue to need to provide. And that can be provided along all axes. It can be provided around process and structure, which is what the partner would do. It could be around introducing new technologies, which is what a promoter would do, or it could be in just locking down the infrastructure and making it more stable and secure, which is what the provider role will do on that basis. Another way that IT can add value is in architecture to provide agility for the organization. And this is a real underserved area, in my view, is appreciating how much architecture can play a role in adding value to the business in terms of getting the right optimization of agility. And there's a tendency to try to be very, very flexible or try to be very mission-centric. And that's where the architects, that's the sweet spot of the architects, figuring out what's the right level of flexibility and agility and what's the right level of mission focus on that basis. A very sophisticated skill set. It's a little like when you hire an architect to build a house. You're not really hiring the architect, you're hiring a designer. It's the aesthetics of the house that you're looking at, but the architecture, the structural integrity of the building is absolutely critical, and that's more important actually than the aesthetics of what you have there. Same thing with IT, is that when people talk about to architects, they're usually talking about user interfaces or UX experience or so on and so forth. But the integrity of the architecture enables agility, it enables scalability, it enables resilience. And that ability to synthesize all of those elements to get the right balance is a critical skill set, and what I would consider to be a very mature aspect of an IT organization's ability to do that. And then finally, it's transformation. It's the ability to recognize that IT is an enabling capability that will allow the organization to change in a very fundamental way. And with this COVID-19 crisis that we have right now, transformation is very high on the agenda. So that's the sweet spot, I would say, in terms of that. So it's a little bit long answer to a short question, but an important question, because maturity of the organization is its ability to operate in all four spheres. And we've seen that reflected in the taxonomy. Those organizations that are more mature tend to use the DBL terminology. Those organizations that are less mature tend to use the BRM terminology.
Yeah, and each organization is unique, so their levels of maturity in all of those areas will, of course, be unique as well.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why we like this framework, because the framework, I mean, the difference between a framework and a model is that a framework assures you're asking the right questions. A model gets you the right answers. And so you're not going to work model levels on questions like that. You want to work framework issues. You want to make sure that you're asking the right questions and looking at the problem in the right way, and you have the clarity about where you want to put the focus on. And that's why this model has been so useful over so many years we've been using it.
We've had a great question come in, and it says, what techniques can I use to move a CIO away from solely focusing on short-term operational issues and start investing more time in strategic and longer-term initiatives?
Well, I guess it depends on who you are. If you're the CEO, it's a lot easier than if you're working for the CIO. So it all depends on that. But the understanding and maturity of the CIO is really critical. This is all about leadership. And one of the changes that the IT organization needs to make if it wants to continue to survive in any sort of, attractive way, is it needs to get away from the operational provider mentality focus on reducing cost and providing a stable platform that supports the business. I mean, that all sounds very logical and very plausible, but it's terribly boring. And it is terribly uninteresting for people that are stuck in that quadrant. They don't like it. Who likes to be there, told what to do, and then basically execute it and get no credit for it? So one thing is to step outside of that mentality and to look at the business in a broader context. And some of the techniques that we recommend are things like, subscribe to not, some technology magazine, but subscribe to the FT, or subscribe to The Economist, or read great fiction. Fiction is a great way to stimulate the imagination and get you to think beyond just kind of operational thing. Go to movies, go to plays, learn poetry, practice meditation. There are lots of things that can be done to change the mentality away from this left brain centric, rational execution for economic efficiency in response to the business, to engage in a very rich conversation with the business about how you can really add value and be a peer in the overall business. And the key to success, and one of the indicators of success, is who does the CIO report to? And if the CIO reports to the CEO, that's a very good sign. That's a very good sign that at least the CEO understands that there's a strategic agenda, and they probably picked that person because of their ability to execute on that. So that's the first thing I would look for, is where does the CIO report to? And if you're the CEO, it's a lot easier to get the CIO to change their mentality than if you're working for the CIO. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, and if I am the CEO, how am I going to ensure that my business leaders are exploiting technology?
Well, a lot of it has to do with what you do and what you say. And what you do is more important than what you say. Organizations don't function on messages. Organizations function on signals. They don't listen to what people say, they watch what they do. And the signals that the CEO can send to the organization are much more powerful than any sort of platitudes. I mean, you always hear about, IT is a strategic asset and we need to be more digitally enabled and all of these kind of platitudes you hear. But ask yourself, who does the CIO report to? Do they sit at the top table? Are they there making decisions as a peer with marketing, with finance on that basis? I remember a long time ago when I was a consultant working in the field, and I was working with a customer who had a real problem with an ERP project. And the person, the CEO asked me, they said, well, what should what should I do with this, with the person here? I mean, this person's running the project, and how do I know if I've got the right person running the project? I said, ask yourself one question. Would this person be on your list, short list to replace you? Does this person have CEO potential? And if this person doesn't have CEO potential, then it's the wrong person on the project, because it's not, implementing ERP isn't about implementing technology. It's about introducing technology to make a business change. And that business change agenda, that transformation agenda, is the way of the CEO thinking. So the first thing the CEO can do is get the CIO to report directly to them. The second thing they can do is that it is part of a critical agenda of the meetings that they take place and the allocation of resources. Who allocates resources in the business? So if the CFO is the person that's saying, we have this much money for this particular area, we have this much money for this particular area, and we have this much left over for IT, you've got the wrong signals going out to the organization. What you want to have is the CIO in a position of actually participating in the decision-making about how to allocate resources across the company, not just, oh, what's my budget for this year and how much do I need to cut from that. So having the CIO participate in the budget process, in the allocation of resource process, is really critical. And those signals that you send to the organization get out really loud and clear. When they start to see that, they say, yeah, that's very different on that basis.
Thanks, Len. And I'm going to take us back to BRM with this next question. Do you think that all IT personnel should practice BRM skills and not just the BRM themselves?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that they need to be more cognizant of those aspects of what they do that go beyond just technology, because that will help everyone. That will help them understand what they're doing. People that are in more operational roles, where the focus needs to be on process, that needs to be on technology integrity, that needs to be on security, have less of a need for that, and they have less of an application for that. The people that are involved in conversations around process change or structural change or transformation programs need to have those skills more than the people that are there. But the BRM is a role. It's a way of thinking. It's an activity. It's not a specific position. Some organizations have formal BRM organizations, and we work a lot with them. But very frequently, when we run our programs, and we found this to work actually quite well, is you have BRMs, and then you have architects, and you have project managers, and you have different skill sets in the organizations participating. Even though they don't have the title of BRM, they understand the skill sets that are necessary to be more effective in that role, and that makes the whole thing work much easier on that basis. So the answer is complicated. It's not one size fits all. It is yes and no, but it's a matter of understanding what that person's role is. I mean, someone who's not comfortable with these sort of conversations, someone who has no interest in business, someone who has no interest in developing the right hemisphere of their brain and stimulating that kind of activity, well, there's no point in forcing that. There's no point in putting someone in a program like that. And that's why this framework is also very useful. And we ask people, where do you feel most comfortable? And there's no shame in saying, I feel comfortable being a provider. That's what I like to do. I really like to engage in technology. I think it's really neat. That's why I got into this business, and I'm really good at it. We need those people, and those people are valuable to the business. And then some people aspire to move into peer roles. And so we should enable them to be able to do that. So it's very much an individual's choice as to whether they develop those skill sets. And it also depends on what their natural aptitude is, their natural talents, their natural predisposition, and what they want to do.
Thanks. And next question in, we've got a flurry of them. So I'm going to try to answer some in summary of others. So what 3 things would you do to develop IT leadership and managers?
Well, I would say,
yeah,
I mean, in a sense, I'm starting to repeat myself, because, IT, what we found is that people in IT organizations are generally pretty intelligent, pretty competent, pretty educated, and pretty capable of what they do. That is not the problem. They don't need to spend more time figuring out how they can be better at what they do. What they need to do is to develop an appreciation and an understanding of how they can engage with the business more effectively. And they can do that by focusing on some of these softer skills. We have one module that we use in our program around emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is really, really important skill set for a BRM or a DBL to have. And what's important, and a lot of people don't really actually realize this, is that emotional intelligence is the one form of intelligence that you have that you can actually improve. The intelligence that you have that's left brain, that's logical and rational, and that you get tested on, tends to remain pretty stable throughout one's life. You get measured on it, it does vary, there are vary, but the amplitude of variance is minuscule. You can actually improve your emotional intelligence by proactively engaging in some best practices that are well understood and well known. And that emotional intelligence will give you a greater awareness of yourself. It'll give you a greater awareness of other people and how you can engage with them. It'll give you a better sense of how to collaborate and how to cooperate. A lot of people that get fired that are put in, particularly CIOs that are put into the role of CIOs, don't get fired because they're not technically capable. They get fired or they lose their job or they lose their credibility because they can't engage with the business in an effective way. And it's generally because of a lack of appreciation that the business world operates under a different set of rules. It's not, everything is not clear cut. There's a lot of ambiguity in the business. There's a lot of unstructured problems that the business is dealing with. It's much more important in business to be able to understand what the problem is than to understand what the answer is. And IT is very comfortable with answers, but they're not so comfortable with questions. And the business is often dealing with questions. And so people that want to advance their careers and want to become more effective in that area should focus on things like, okay, understand a little bit about what this emotional intelligence is, understand what are some of the techniques you can use and practices. I would recommend reading broadly in other areas, history, philosophy, literature, whatever subject you have. Go to movies, go to plays, socialize with people. Don't sit down at lunch and do your emails. Have a conversation with someone on that basis. You know, practice meditation. That's a very effective technique. There are some very effective techniques for helping people become more self-aware, which enables them to be clearer in their thinking and engaging with other people. These are the things that people in IT organizations, they just don't focus on, and because they were never brought up. And if you get an undergraduate degree in technology, it's very unlikely you took courses in any of those areas. You know how to do software development, and you know what infrastructure is, you know what an operating system is, and you know all the technology aspects, but these right brain things make the IT organization more effective, and they make the BRM. They're actually essential for that on that basis. And there's I like, as you know, I like the metaphor of the doctor, and there's a really nice word about an effective doctor. And the word is they have good bedside manner. You know, someone to get through medical school is not easy. It's a very rigorous process. And the people that come out are highly qualified in their own particular discipline. But that bedside manner, that ability to have empathy, the ability to listen to the patient, to be able to diagnose properly and then prescribe the right solution is the key to being a really great doctor. And that's the same thing with the BRM. It's not the technical skill sets of understanding the technology. Avoid using these acronyms when you're talking to people in the business. They don't know what you're talking about. And you begin to use business language, understand what the balance sheet looks like, understand what the key issues of the business are, understand the environmental aspects of it. That's the way that the IT organization can advance on this agenda.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to be going to the hospital with a broken arm and then wanting to fix my leg because that's what they know.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is, it's really, really important, is that we need to recognize that it doesn't matter how good the bedside manner is of the doctor. If the doctor doesn't have the competencies in the discipline in which they're practicing their skill, it's useless. I mean, the last thing we want is, when we get on an airplane, is a creative pilot, right? We want a pilot to basically execute. And the same thing with the IT organization that needs to execute on that baseline services. Otherwise, they won't have the opportunity to participate in the higher level conversations. I remember when I was acting in a BRM role, I was at the headquarters of one of our clients, and I was effectively the BRM managing the relationship and so on and so forth. And the chairman of the company came up to me and asked me a question that was about their PC wasn't working. And if the PC doesn't work, they're not going to have a conversation with you about strategy. So the fundamentals need to be there. The provider role needs to be bulletproof, needs to operate properly. Then we can have the broader conversations. So not to neglect the provider role. It remains critical forever.
And just touching on those roles, we've had a question. Is it correct to view the roles as additive rather than mutually exclusive? I.e., can the promoter still be expected to act as provider? And is the partner expected to also be the promoter and the provider roles?
Yeah, it will depend on the individual, but we've seen a number of people that are very skilled at a number of these different roles. So they're not exclusive, and they're basically I've met people that are very, very savvy with technology, and that's the preponderance of what they have. And they really understand the technology, they follow all the trends, they look at all the things that are going on, but they're also very savvy about the business. And they can sit down and talk about their business, the processes that are critical, the data that's critical, the structures that might be getting in the way or that might be enabling it. And so it's a matter of what domain someone majors in, of where they are. It's a little easier for the partner to move into the peer role because technology doesn't play as big of a role. But there's nothing to stop someone who's really, really excellent at provider activity moving into a peer role because they have the skill sets to be able to do it. So I wouldn't look at it as exclusive. I would look at it, what is your major and what is your minor? When you go to college, you always declare a major, but sometimes you have a minor. What is your major and what is your minor? Okay, I'm a provider. I'm going to provider, but I'm also going to be a promoter because I think that the technology is really cool. Or I'm a partner, but I also really like the technology, so I want to do that. Or I'm a promoter, but I also want to operate on that level. And I've seen all over the place the different skill sets. So don't put yourself in a box and say, I'm either one or the other. Figure out what your majors and your minors are and then orchestrate accordingly.
Great. Thanks, Len. I've just looked at the time. We've got a couple of minutes left. So I guess one final question I'm going to ask is, what I'm seeing and hearing from clients is that every organization is currently under pressure. We've been through a lot over the past few months. What is your two-piece advice, Len, to keep the conversation going in this space?
Well, I think every business is under pressure right now, and the environment is very, very difficult and very, very treacherous on that basis. And from one day to the other, it changes. I mean, just yesterday, the markets were up, everyone was optimistic, the economy's recovering, employment's coming back, countries are opening up, and today it's all doom and gloom. The markets are off, the cases, at least here in the United States, the cases are up, and so on and so forth. So I think the one thing that I would advise anyone who's in this business is just maintain perspective. And the more you can take a balanced view and a higher level view of fundamentally what's going on, which this is a very good environment to be in technology. This is a great time to be in technology because technology is now being viewed widely, not as a disruptor of the business, but an enabler of the business to survive very difficult times. And if the right focus is there, if the right diagnosis is there, if the right understanding of what the problem is, and the ability to orchestrate the organization against that agenda, that is a very, very exciting role to have. It's a very exciting business to be in rather than just stuck in the data center, making sure the lights are staying on that basis. So I think it's a matter of maintaining an optimistic, balanced perspective, looking at things in the longer term, the broader term, and again, focusing on the business. What does the business need? How can we best respond? And how can we get through all of this? Because eventually it's going to go away and we're going to have a different challenge coming to us. We're never in an environment where there isn't a problem, right? And I spent years and years as a sailor. And the one thing I found about sailing is that either you got too much wind or you don't have enough wind. And if you got too much wind, you got too much waves. And you're always having to just pay attention, and the change is always there. So I like the metaphor of sailing as a way of navigating through all this stuff. So that's just my thoughts.
I had a joke somewhere around Spotlight on IT then, thinking that they're always told that they just keep the lights on, and the only lights that aren't on are the big city offices right now. Everyone working from home remotely.
It's a big change. It's a big change. And so, but that's where value is created, and that's where value is destroyed. Change brings both. And the opportunity is there for us to bring value by helping them respond to that in a positive way.
Absolutely. Yes. Amen to that. So thank you, Len. You gave us some great insight there. We're literally a couple of minutes, and I don't want to keep you guys any longer from the sunshine, at least for those that are in the UK. Hopefully it's just as sunny all across the world. I've popped up a little slide on here to say, if you haven't read the commentary already that Lem has kindly published for us, we will share some links at the end of this. And if you want to get in touch to explore your digital IQ at your organisation and perhaps how the LEF can help support you, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you so much for joining with us, and we'll see you next time.